Senator Jeff Merkley here, and I'm with Melissa Adamson, who's with the National Center for Youth Law, to address a major challenge with a law that's under consideration before the Senate right now. The law is called Laken Riley, and it pertains to the detention of immigrants who have committed a minor or a major crime while in the United States. But this law, as written, has some really horrific problems with it, and we're here to talk about that. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Senator.
So, Melissa, it's my understanding that the law requires ICE to hold a child who was suspected of a crime, that is arrested, but has never been charged and never been convicted, and that there's no process in which they can be released down the road. Is that right?
Yes, Senator, that is exactly what the Laken Riley Act would do.
So we have thousands and thousands of children who may in fact just be swept off the street, permanently locked up by ICE in probably expanding soft side tent imprisonment camps.
That would be the expectation, Senator. The current law allows for discretion, and the Laken Riley Act overrides that to require ICE to detain children who have never been charged or convicted.
Okay, well that's not America. You're saying that somebody who, a police officer saw somebody put their hand in their pocket, thought maybe they were shoplifting, arrests a 12-year-old child, take them down, they empty their pockets, they have nothing in them, so they're not charged, they would be released. But now under this law, regardless of the fact that they were not charged and not convicted, ICE comes in and is required under this law to imprison that child with no established process for them to be released.
That's right, Senator. Even if a mistake is made, that mistake cannot be corrected under this act. And as a children's rights attorney who has seen the impact of detention on children, it is profoundly harmful.
So huge harm to children. They're just being swept out of their families under this law. But there's other aspects of this as well. Let's say an adult who also is mistakenly arrested, never charged, never convicted, but ICE here too is required to lock them up with no procedure in place for them to be able to be released.
That's correct.
So let's say that this individual has back at their house children, and maybe they're a single parent, or maybe they're two-parent household, but one of the parents who has been locked up is the one who has the income for the family. Uh, what happens to those children back at the house?
So, what would happen to those children is an open question, but it's absolutely a possibility that they're left home alone or that they enter the child welfare system, that they get swept up into the foster care system. And, the National Center for Youth Law has spent decades litigating the abuses of child welfare systems across our nation, and it is the last place that we want more kids to end up.
So I went to the floor of the Senate and I pointed out these two egregious problems with children. And I was told by the proponents of this bill, don't worry, there's something called the Flores settlement that will protect the children, that will override the broad scope of this bill. Tell us, is there a Flores settlement or agreement that's going to protect children in this situation?
There is not. We have served as Flores counsel on that Flores settlement agreement since 1985, and I can say with certainty that the Flores settlement will not prevent undocumented children from being mandatorily detained under this act. It would compel the federal government to detain children, even if they're not charged or convicted, to be mandatorily detained.
So I talked to my colleagues across the aisle and I said, the expert on Flores, you all, you've been the council for now 40 years as an organization. Says no, that was a myth when this law was presented on the House side and when it was pushed on the Senate side. And they said, well, they've got some other legal advice that there are other things in the law that will protect the children. And so the requirement in this law that says they must be detained or imprisoned if they have been suspected, that is arrested, of a crime, even if they're not charged, even if they're not convicted, even if they're not a flight risk, even if there's no danger to society, they must be. So we would have an estimate from ICE, I think, of an additional 110,000 beds needed just for the additional adults to be locked up. Massive expansion of prison camps across this country. But they say that there are other provisions and somewhere in the law that would protect children. And so I said, well, what are they? And I couldn't get an answer. Have you been able to find out if there's any other provisions in the law that they're talking about that could possibly override the law we're about to pass?
Senator, we have tried to understand why some offices believe that there would be other legal protections for children detained under the Laken Riley Act, and we have gotten absolutely no answer. There have been some suggestions from offices that the federal law, the Trafficking Victim Protections Reauthorization Act, known as the TVPRA, would provide some protections, but that's mistaken. That only applies to a very small subsection of children. It would not apply to the vast majority of children that would be subject to Laken Riley. And there's fundamental misunderstandings about that law.
It's my understanding that there are a few provisions of the Flores settlement that are not in conflict with Laken Riley that would still apply, like humanitarian conditions under which children are held.
That's correct. So the Flores settlement sets basic humanitarian standards for children that are imprisoned. That's things like basic nutrition, sanitary conditions, access to medical care. However, the Flores settlement will do nothing to prevent children from being inappropriately locked up under the Laken Riley Act.
Okay, so Melissa, thank you for all the work the National Center for Youth Law does. The Flores work on Flores has provided fair treatment for children in so many important ways over the years. But to everybody who is watching this video, the Senate is about to vote on Monday for a bill that will require ICE to lock up children who have never been charged and never convicted of a crime and provide no mechanism for their release. This is wrong. This needs to be fixed. This has to be fixed. Allow amendments to be debated next week to make sure that we fix this and do not treat children as by sweeping them off the streets and locking them up in prison camps. Thank you so much. Thank you, Melissa.